Hello buddy, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are in Arnhem playing as Norsca against the Vampire Counts, and this is a match that I think is pretty trash for Norsca. Now, for factions that don't have a good access to ranged weapons or don't have sort of good healing of their own and are often susceptible to fear and terror, Vampire Counts can often be a troublesome faction. And obviously Norsca kind of fits most of those points. So for the build here, I was trying to make something that was more monster centric, more small blobbing that could survive effects from Mortis engines, deal with Terrorgeist spam and that sort of stuff, and also do okay against mass chaff. So for my lord, I'm running with good old Throg. There isn't much to be said. Throg is, in my opinion, probably the best way to go unless you're going to go with like Wolfric on a Mammoth. He does have Foe Seeker, he's of course got Regen, he's got Foe Seeker, he's got Fight or Die, and of course we did bring the Wintertooth Crown because you want that unbreakability on your infantry to try to keep them in the fray once things start going south. Alongside him we do have a Skinwolf Werkin who is stripped down mostly. He does have the Ruinous Flesh, which gives him plus 18 armor. Definitely pretty nifty, allows you to be a little tankier, especially against units like Blood Knights. That can be very nice. And then we do have Familiar Balefiend of Fire, which has a whole slew of abilities. Now, yeah, I think personally that you want either Lore of Fire or Lore of Shadows, so you have a good counter to ethereal units, because Norsca doesn't have much else in that to counter that. So in this case we do have Fire for Flames for Ruin. We also have Piercing Bolts of Burning to do with blobs, Cascading Fire Cloak for the protection, and then Fireball in case my opponent has a Mortis engine, something to pressure it a bit. Finally, for our single entities, we do have the Soul Crusher, which is a Regiment of Renown War Mammoth. It does, of course, have some pretty monstrous melee stats, and it does have the benefit of Enrage, which gives it a temporary 44% damage resist, and it's a really nice ability. It makes the Soul Crusher pretty damn tanky, even by Mammoth standards. It makes it like even tankier. For our main line, not much to be said. 3 units of Marauder Berserkers, Brutes of the Hound, and then 2 Spearmen. The Brutes of the Hound, when Marauder Berserkers, will kind of deal with most undead infantry pretty effectively. Obviously, though, against Graveguard, they are going to struggle a bit, and that is definitely going to be an issue. The problem is that if you bring Marauder Champions, who obviously will do much better against Graveguard, you are then sacrificing a lot of leadership. The Marauder Berserkers have much better leadership than Champions do, especially Brutes of the Hound. But Berserkers, of course, do get further benefits to... I do believe they get further... Oh, they've got immunity psychology with Frenzy, which is nice. I did think they got more leadership. I guess that's something that only happens with Rage. Yeah, with Rage you get extra leadership. But regardless, I do think the Marauder Berserkers are better suited for that. Plus, they are a lot cheaper. Finally, for a bit of shoot and scoot, we do have 3 units of Marauder Horsemen just to heckle and harass my opponent. And once again, to counter things like Mortis engines, because those are a huge threat to my infantry blob. And I don't really have too many tools to catch them. There isn't much Norsca can bring to really threaten a Mortis engine. If I, for example, bring Marauder Hunters, they're just going to get shut down by zombie spam. If I try to use Skin Wolves or units like that, they're just too slow. They're not going to be able to get in on top of the infantry. And that really only leaves me with some single models, so things like Werkin and Soul Crusher. But once again, they are fairly slow. So it's very difficult to get on top of, especially the Claw of Nagash with its chilling aura. Now for my opponent, he decided to roll with good old Blood Dragon Vampire Lord, who is pretty ridiculous still. Obviously, instead of properly, I think, rebalancing him by probably removing the Helm of Discord and giving him some other ability. They nerfed Helm of Discord, but not by much, and so he's still stupidly powerful. He also has Heart Piercing, which gives him Armor Sundering. Of course, he's got sort of anti-heroes for the damage, Invocation of the Heck, Raise Dead, and then he does have Honor or Death, which gives him extra leadership and, more importantly, damage resist and melee, which is pretty nuts. He's a very, very tanky lord, very ludicrous with his stats, and can honestly dish out a lot of hurt even to some of my more elite troops here, like Throg or Soul Crusher and units like that. There are a whole bunch of bats here to compromise backlines and sort of skirmishers and that sort of stuff. 2 units of Blood Knights, of course, who could apply a whole bunch of pressure and just crush my infantry underfoot. There's really not much I can do against them, besides try to chip away at them over time with Throg and my Werkin, the Soul Crusher. And then for his infantry line, my opponent has a pretty respectable group here. He's got 3 units of Graveyard Weapons. Honestly, overkill against Berserkers, but had I brought Champions, they'd be very, very strong. Some Skeleton Spears and then some Graveguard, including Sternsmen. So a very, very potent lineup, and it's going to be rough. Every though the bats are going to commit on top of my Brutes of the Hound, which is a very big mistake in my opinion. Fell bats, very squishy. Brutes of the Hound do have a bonus versus infantry and monstrous melee attack, and they're going to be able to cleave some of these bats down long before they manage to take off. So definitely some rough stuff there. These guys immediately losing 7 and 2 models, so definitely not what they want happening probably. Anytime the Mammoth did push ahead a little bit, but isn't quite committing. And my opponent is going to dive in here with the Blood Dragon and Vampire Lord. And this is a big mistake. He does use the Helm of Discord a bit prematurely. His Knights are still trying to flank over here on the high ground. His infantry is not in the fight. It's really only him and his Flash. And this is a bit of greedy play. This is kind of one of those things I usually try to warn against doing because I have a tendency of doing it myself. But it's definitely, here it's not helping my opponent very much. And you can see we are trying to pin down his Blood Dragon Lord, keep him in the fray, force him to stand and fight, and more importantly, force him to get beaten in the face by the Werkin and the Soul Crusher and the and Throg. And of course the Zombie Summon is not lasting very long at all, which is pretty nuts. It just shows how fast we're able to cleave them down. Meantime, the Berserkers here going toe-to-toe with the Stearnsmen, Spearmen tying down the Graveguard, and just trying to buy me time while we slide out here in this box, but it's just not working. Unfortunately, though, for my opponent, the Bats are going to get slaughtered, and that is going to then leave the field pretty open for my Skirmish Cav. They're going to be able to escape and stay alive. Unfortunately, I'm not able to really stay on the Blood Dragon Lord here. He is kind of staying A-okay, getting a summon in there. Soul Crusher, though, diving in, popping in rage, and diving into the Blood Knights, and doing so much damage. Look at how much he's done. These Blood Knights, basically, you have Blood Knights 5,200 HP. These guys immediately drop by about 2,000 HP. So perhaps bringing like double Mammoth could be just monstrous against these guys. In comes Throg, in comes the Werkin, and they're just dumpstering these Blood Knights. So they have really been put into a horrible spot, not able to do enough, just completely forced off. So perhaps this is something I should be trying more often, bringing, say, a double War Mammoth build, or hell, even just Wolfric on a Mammoth. But you can see the Blood Knights here just losing models. They lost about 20 of the models and about 60% of their HP, so it's pretty nuts how much we did in very short burst. But unfortunately, the front line is going far worse for us. Now, obviously, our skirmishers here are going to mop up these bats, and that's going to leave them free to do damage. But on the flip side, my berserkers are, well, one unit over here is basically gone. My spearmen are gone, and at this point, it's just 2 units of berserkers, the Brutes of the Hound and the normal unit. Throg, Skinwolf Werkin, the Fimir Bale Fiend of Fire, and the Soul Crusher. The balance of power is pretty decisively in my favor at this point, but definitely is misleading because once my infantry pocket dies, if my opponent get a good surround and especially focus out my Fimir Balefiend, things could go very badly. And you can see we are using our Wintertooth Crown to keep our troops in the fight. Over here, the Blood Dragon Vampire Lord is trying to get in on my cav, but honestly, he's only got 90 armor, and he's got no shields, so these guys, though not having the most impressive AP, are going to be able to whittle him down a good bit. And in the meantime, my opponent here definitely getting whittled down a good bit. You can see we're going to be casting a buff on one of my units. I do believe I cast it on the Brutes of the Hound there, trying to keep them in the fray, but in comes Helm of Discord again. So such a stupidly powerful ability, and doing quite a bit for my opponent here, debuffing all of my troops. But unfortunately for him, we do get some bombardments in there with our Firecaster, and that is on the flip side helping me a whole bunch. And in the meantime, all those javelins flying into the back of these Graveguards, chipping away, whittling down the Blood Knights, who I really want to bring down as much as possible. Helping out a whole bunch. But at the same time, Soul Crusher here getting surrounded, not really able to take advantage of his monster's charger bonus and chariot-like effects, and getting whittled down, which is on the flip side definitely things going a little grim for me. Enrage, of course, is going to be keeping it pretty healthy, but things definitely looking worse and worse. Marauder Berserkers breaking on still 24 models, so definitely some rough stuff. Now, the Brutes of the Hound are in it to win it, but they're just going to start to struggle. They're up to 232 kills, obviously cleaving through a lot of this trash, but still, it's such a struggle. And now the Soul Crusher is starting to lose leadership. It's down to 32 leadership, starting to fold a little bit. Fortunately, though, Throg is still very healthy, the Fimir in okay shape, about half health, and the Werkin is very healthy. And of course, it has regen, so both Throg and the Werkin here are a very potent force, and my opponent has at this point kind of wasted his good grace with the Blood Dragon. He has made multiple attempts to get in, do some damage, and it's kind of failed every single time because the Werkin and the Throg are in there, and they're able to really slap him around and teach him a lesson. In the meantime, another barrage is coming down. You can see the Blood Dragon has used Invocation Mech on himself, but that barrage of piercing bolts just raining death and destruction down. You can see the Fimir Balefiend now up to 109 kills, and let's be honest, most of that is not from his melee. That's mostly from his bombardments, and it's just been so much work. Unfortunately for me, the Soul Crusher is starting to struggle. He's definitely slowly closing on death, and it's really unfortunate. But on the flip side, the Blood Knights starting to fall apart. These guys very low. These guys on only 2,000 HP. The Werkin is in there, definitely doing some damage, but definitely a very rough situation for myself, despite the fact that it looked pretty good. Over here, I was too slow to pull my Marauder Horsemen away. I didn't have them in skirmish mode, so they're going to get caught here by the Blood Knights on the charge, and although they are going to pepper these guys down, they are losing multiple models, which is really not good. So definitely a big misplay on my part. That said, the Blood Knights, as they start dying, my opponent is going to be in a bad spot because his Blood Dragon has now hit his healing cap, which is just disastrous. We have used the Winter Crown, the Wintertooth Crown, to keep our Marauder Spearmen in the fight to the bitter end. So, despite all the debuffs hitting them, they are going to stick around. Heart Piercing over here is being used to debuff my troops. My opponent trying to snipe my Familiar Balefiend, but with Ruinous Flesh in there, this sort of death blob definitely helping. Ruinous Flesh, this is another important factor that I kind of glossed over in this match, but the Ruinous Flesh from the Workin is helping keep Throg and the Soul Crusher and the Familiar Balefiend all in fairly good shape. And it definitely has having a significant impact over here. The Blood Dragon Lord forced to flee. In the meantime, the Blood Knights over here trying to pursue and just getting just shot to death. They obviously have shields. They obviously have pretty good armor, and they do have a special ability here, the Flag of Bloodkeep, which gives them 22% missile resist when they're out of melee. But obviously, it's not going to be enough against just this constant hail of javelins, which we're using up here to whittle them down and reduce them to nothing. The Soul Crusher, very close to, well, I say very close to dying, but then you look at its HP and it's almost 3,000 still, which is definitely not bad, especially compared to these two tattered units. It's going to get a nice little charge here, do another couple hundred damage. They're definitely nowhere near as impressive as those initial charges before. And these Blood Knights are going to fall apart. And you can see this unit over here buckling completely down to 3 models. This unit over here also very low. And the charge from the Horsemen is going to come in here from the behind with the Seal Chair and break their leadership for good. And with that, Soul Crusher's leadership is going to start climbing back once again. The skin will work in here, bogging my opponent down. And I actually completely forgot my spears here, and I really should have pulled them back into the fray. But all of a sudden, Balance of Power Shift decided something in my favor. My opponent basically left with nothing. Soul Crusher here plowing through his troops, doing a bit of cleanup in aisle 9 at this point. It's over 200 kills, so some monster stuff. Unfortunately, my caster did actually go down. I'm not even sure where he is in this clump of slaughtered bodies, but he did go down. He's no longer visible anywhere, but it doesn't really matter. My opponent's army is going to break here, and it's going to be GG. He does get a summon of zombies off, but like I said, it just doesn't matter. These guys are going to get cleaned up. My opponent does decide to GG out before we have to wait for that cleanup. So the strat, well, it worked, but I'm not. My opponent didn't bring, say, a Mortis Engine or one of those units that can make your life pretty miserable. I do think this match is pretty bad for Norsca. Perhaps in some ways less bad than it is for Chaos. It's a very the situation you're put in with Norsca is very similar to Chaos. On one hand, you do have much worse options for countering enemy single entities than Chaos does, because you don't have Shaggoths. On the flip side, though, you can actually clear away all the trash protecting something like a Mortis Engine or even units like Graveguard in some ways more efficiently, because you can bring Soul Crushers, you can bring Mammoths, and Vampire Counts really do struggle against those units. In a hindsight, perhaps what might be a smarter build here is ditch Throg and just bring Wolfric on War Mammoth, and it might actually do you a better service there. Now, otherwise, well, yeah, the build works. The Firecaster obviously very nice for nuking my opponent's blobs. The Skinwolf Varkin I think is absolutely great because it's a good unit for slugging out with Cav, and I think with the Mammoths really showed how much they can do to cavalry. Those Blood Knights tried to charge in, and they immediately lost a solid 60% of their HP. And if we had a second Mammoth in there, obviously it's a huge investment for Norsca, but with 2 Mammoths, you could essentially annihilate 2 units of Blood Knights, or nearly 2 units of Blood Knights, in the space of a charge. And that could be decisive, especially if your opponent is using a less Winds of Magic capable Lord like a Blood Dragon. Otherwise, the Berserkers are a bit of an iffy pick. It's tough. The Marauder Champions are obviously significantly better combat stat-wise, but their leadership is more prone to buckling, and they're much more expensive, which is tough. I'm not entirely sure which way I think is better to go. I definitely don't think you can afford to go chaff heavy, because you will get smushed. Similarly, Marauder Horsemen, not a bad pick, but I'm not sure if you'd be better off with throwing Axes or Marauder Horsemasters. But once again, a lot of it comes down to cost, and it's simply difficult to cram in those extra units. You could, of course, go for like a full-on cheese build and just bring mass monsters, bring like double Mammoth and just a tiny contingent of infantry, which is probably trash tier infantry, like Ice Storm Marauders and a bunch of Marauders. But that feels a little gimmicky. But maybe that's the way to go. But regardless, it's definitely a bit of a tough matchup, I think. For my opponent, Gaming by Night here, definitely a cool build. But my main critique, to be honest, would actually be the Blood Dragon. Now, the infantry fight, personally, I usually avoid winning the infantry fight. It sounds kind of stupid, but I usually don't bother trying to take the infantry fight with Norsca instead, or with Vampire Counts. Instead, I like to bring, say, Vargulfs and a lot of more cavalry. So, say, double Blood Knight, Black Knight with lances and barding, or especially Varix Reavers, Dire Pack, and then Manfred on a horse, for example, coming in with, of course, his Lord of Death, which is very, very potent. And then leaving the frontline fight as in a much weaker state, with just basically just the Sternsman and maybe a few Graveguard, but mostly trash to just hold things down. But I do think this build, it worked relatively well. It definitely came right down to the wire. The big problem was that my opponent just didn't have the tools to really crack the Werkin and Throg in the long run. They were just very, very difficult to snipe. He had difficulty sniping the Familiar Battlefiend, and of course Throg and the Werkin were just absolutely beastly. Able to stick around through thick and thin, and the Soul Crusher absorbed a lot of damage. So I think if you go with one of these more mobile builds, one of the nice things is you can clean up all this peripheral chaff, like the Marauder Horsemen, and then sort of cycle charge the infantry box, collapse the infantry box, and then once those single models are isolated, then you can just tear them apart in more sustained melee. And that's just my 2 cents there. But otherwise, you can do Mortis Engine. That's also pretty potent. Regardless, this is not a bad build, I think, and definitely came very close to pulling it off. I think perhaps just being a little more patient would have been good to keep the Blood Dragon, and that might have actually been the deciding factor there, that my opponent was a little impatient with committing his Blood Dragon and Bats. But regardless, well played my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it fun and entertaining, and perhaps give you some ideas on how to run Norsca in this match. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, share. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, don't hesitate to post them, and I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.